Can I build a tiny home using a trampoline? I actually did this over a year ago on TikTok, but I think it's time to give this challenge a redo. So let's get into the build. Obviously, to start, I place the trampoline down to get an idea of the space I'm working with. I then go straight in with basic shapes to measure the heights of the walls, as I am going to have to make custom walls with custom windows, because the regular walls won't fit this height. Then probably the worst part of this build was figuring out the windows. I had to use structural beams to outline the windows, and if you have used structurals before, you know how much of a pain they are to work with. I'm gonna speed this next bit up to save you the pain of watching me struggle to place the beams. But just know this is about 5 minutes of footage of me messing up long. Then I started to figure out the color scheme I was going for. I know I wanted a mix of neutrals to bright popping colors, so I began with those neutrals on the walls. Once I finished that first wall, I then went to duplicate it, but realized I had messed up with the structurals once again, as half of the window didn't duplicate. So we are now just a minute into this video, and I'm already struggling with these stupid beams for a second time. And don't worry, this isn't the last time I'm struggling either. Finally, I can get back to duplicating the windows to the 4 corners and beginning to fill in the other walls too. I then begin to start playing with the entryway to the house. For some reason, this took me unnecessarily long to figure out the shape and size. Then of course, because this aren't real walls, I also had to make a fake door, which was really easy to do. All I did was using a basic shape, scale it to the size of the door, and make it look like the door was open. Once I did that, I used a few structurals to add some fake hinges and a handle. Then, continuing the pain of using structurals, for some reason I decided I wanted more detail on the walls, so I added these little Tudor-inspired details to the tops of the front walls, and I love how they turned out. Then I began on making my custom roof. I would recommend, if you want to try this for yourself, to do the roof last, as it kinda gets in the way for the rest of the building for me, especially when I was doing the interior. Now this clip of me doing the roof is in 20 times speed, because this footage was actually nearly 10 minutes long. But basically, for the roof, I did the old trick with the carpets and the shapes to add a fake floor, which I then added on a fake custom gable roof and a fake mansard roof. Anyway, after I finally finished the roof, that is most of the difficult steps out of the way, I quickly added some steps in the light, and then it was time for the interior, aka the best part. So because the interior is so small and circular, when doing the inside, it is key for a tiny bit of planning. The planning I did was just mental, but it really helps to keep in mind what section you are designating for which purpose. For example, the sleep area and the kitchen. To start, I began the kitchen, as I knew that was going to be by far the biggest area in the house, and for me it is helpful to begin big and work my way down. Throughout this, I went back and messed around more with the back walls of the house, so they could match the shape of the kitchen. Also, with such tiny walls, I couldn't use any cabinets as they simply wouldn't fit. Therefore, I made a custom fan to go above the oven, as the ones in Game Simple are too big to fit in that tiny gap. Then moving on to the second largest area was the bedroom. Now this was the toughest part of the interior for me to figure out, simply because most beds are just far too big to fit in this tiny area. Therefore, I had to resort to testing toddler beds. However, before I realized only toddlers' beds were going to fit, I spent ages trying to make a custom small bed out of the sleeping bag and cushions, which, although it did look really good, never was going to actually fit into the space I had available. Anyway, after a while of being tortured by this bed not fitting, I gave up and moved on to the Tony bathroom space. This was going to be the last of the 3 areas I was going to build, as it was the smallest. I quickly realized that I did not have enough room for a shower, toilet, and a sink. So, I resorted to placing a floating sink in the kitchen area that would be used in the kitchen and in the bathroom, which actually in studio apartments it isn't uncommon to have the only sink in the kitchen. Then I wanted to add a tiny bit more detail. So, I added a small shelf with some soaps on it and a cactus plant, which realistically the cactus would probably drown from the shower, but this is Roblox, so who cares? Then, I finally went back to bedroom to fix my mistake of trying to make a normal-sized bed work. I realized only a toddler bed would fit, so that is what I went with in the end. I added another small counter continuing from the kitchen to behind the bed to act as an almost makeshift bedside table that would eventually hold a lamp and some books. This is where I finally chose the color scheme of this build. As I said earlier, I love to play with neutrals and pops of color, and in this build so far, I had only used neutrals, so the colors I chose were bright yellow and green. The yellow was the star of the show, as that was the main color I wanted to be spread throughout the build, whereas I wanted the green to be more reserved for plants and other greenery that I wanted in the exterior later on. Here I use one of my fave building tricks, where I layered the carpets on top of each other with the same colors, just different textures. This adds so much to the room with such little effort. Now we had virtually finished the interior. The only thing I had left was some final changing around of some textures and colors. The last thing I wanted to add inside was a painting of a yellow sunflower, but of course nothing can run that smooth, as it took me nearly 4 minutes to pick a painting I liked. Finally, it was time to go back to the exterior. Recently, I have been obsessed with the new tropical leaves plants, so of course that is the plant that I used everywhere here. My main aim here was to cover the metal poles which hold the trampoline. I also added a bunch of trees, as always, with a variation in height and width. Here I keep with that same color scheme of the yellows and greens I was talking about earlier. However, I used the color wheel and shade chart to add slight variations in the colors I was using. Then for some reason I decided that I really wanted this build to have a chimney. So I spent far too long trying to add a chimney to this build. However, I eventually realized that it looked ridiculous and also made no sense, as there is no fireplace anywhere in this build. So instead I went back to finishing off the landscaping with even more of the tropical plants and yellow flowers, and finally finishing off the build with a small path leading up to the front. And here is the final result. I hope you guys love this build as much as I do, and I hope you had fun watching this video. Make sure to subscribe if you like this, and stay tuned for more videos. Bye.